testosterone is a parasympathetic hormone. We usually think of it as like hormone of aggression and intensity and attack. It's not that at all. It's a hormone, I would say, of dominance, but not aggression necessarily, because it's a parasympathetic hormone. And that's why, I had this personal experience. It took my wife at the time and I 4 years to conceive, our son, because we were so stressed out. When you're stressed out, that's sympathetic. Your parasympathetic just ain't happening, which is digestion, sexual function, testosterone production, rest, relax, digest, repair, detoxify. That's all parasympathetic. Getting folks out of sympathetic dominance into a more parasympathetic balance really helps testosterone, because you can't make testosterone because it's in part a reproductive hormone. And how important is that if you're running from a wild ox?
Welcome back to Unscripted. I'm your host, Jeff Sakamoto, and I've got a very special guest today, Dr. Michael Gaeta, who has a long and illustrious 33-plus year career in which he's trained over 20,000 practitioners, really around natural remedies. And that's what I really want to talk to him about today. What really caught my attention in our initial conversation was his anthem, I think, if it's fair, of nature first, drugs last. So welcome.
Jeff, so good to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
How did you arrive at where you are today? I mean, 33 years later.
35.
You built this.
My 35th anniversary is 35. In 3 days.
Congratulations. That's huge. You don't look old enough to have been doing this for 35 years.
I started young, yeah.
That's good living right there.
Yeah.
How did you arrive here? Give us a little bit about your backstory, kind of how you arrived at, where you're at today. It's really kind of incredible.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. And I have to say the same from what I know of your story. It's pretty remarkable. But I started as a musician. I play the piano. My Steinway there's my Steinway back there.
Nice.
But I was a musician. I grew up in New York City. I played professionally for 10 years. And overlapping with the early years of my practice. And being a performer and church organist, piano teacher was great, and it wasn't quite satisfying. I felt I was compelled to do more, like life was calling me to do more to help people in a more direct way. I love using my hands. I started out as a massage therapist before becoming a nutritionist, herbalist, acupuncturist, and just felt like life had more in store for me. Like there was more for me to give, more for me to contribute, larger ways to serve. And so that was a big thing for me. And then the other thing, Jeff, was I had a lot of health problems, even at that young age of 19 and 20, in my early 20s. I just had a lot of health issues, digestive problems, and other stuff going on with my immune system. I was getting sick a lot of digestive issues. And I realized that, I had to take care of myself better. And through going through massage school for 18 months, a big part of that program was they were very adamant, like, you have to be healthy. You have to be an example for your patients. You have to be a model. You don't have to be perfect, but you just have to be somebody who obviously takes care of themselves if you're going to do this work from a holistic paradigm of do as I do and not just as I say. And that was great for me because it took me a while. My first, you had to have a nutritional evaluation when you were a student. And I saw the chiropractic nutritionist, and his questionnaire said, what are the 5 foods you eat the most? And I grew up in an Italian household in Queens. And so it was pasta, pizza, grilled cheese, which meant Kraft singles on Wonder Bread fried up in parquet margarine. Milkshakes and gummy bears. That's how we achieved
a pretty good diet.
I had the colorful diet. The gummy bears, got me to the colorful diet. And anyway, so I was kind of a mess. And so this process of taking care of myself showed me how powerful this sort of nature first, drugs last philosophy was, and it exposed me to Chinese medicine. And then I really felt a pull to that, because it had an inherently spiritual perspective on self-development, self-cultivation. It emphasized personal responsibility to be somebody who embodies something of radiance and health and vitality. And it had tools that I really resonated with, like bodywork, acupuncture, and herbal medicine. So I just stayed in school for a lot of years and just, kept learning and still have a lot to learn. But now I've, full-time teaching and part-time practice.
Cool. And I want to get into that, but I'll just come at this because there's so much that I want to ask you about. It's fascinating. I find this whole Chinese medicine and natural remedies extremely interesting.
Yes.
I obviously come from the world where we utilize medications in many cases.
Sure. And there's a place for that.
Yep. Things like peptides, what have you. And we've talked a little bit about that, but I just find it fascinating that there are natural alternatives, and we have so many folks that come to us and they don't want to, as an example, get on exogenous testosterone replacement therapy.
Sure.
And so if you were counseling a young man who obviously is struggling from some of the symptoms of low testosterone, what are some of the natural remedies that you would kind of talk them through that have been effective in your practice?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeff. And and the nature first, drugs last philosophy doesn't exclude chemical interventions. There's a place for that. It's just that as you know, Jeff, it's just overused. We have 4% of the population consuming 50% of the world's pharmaceuticals, and we have the worst health outcomes of any developed nation, right, at the greatest expense. So we're spending the most, getting the least, taking the most meds, and what you're doing is sort of a hybrid. It's not really pharma drugs. It's something more akin, or at least in the middle somewhere. It's not quite a food or plant, but it's also not a pharma drug, right? So there's a place for all that. And I don't exclude all of that. I've referred patients out over the years for bioidenticals or whatever, or even antibiotics in those few cases where I wasn't able to help, which is a few, like 2 out of thousands, of folks with infections. But so there's a place for all that. I'm not averse to any of that. But if there is, as Rudolf Steiner said, the brilliant Austrian philosopher and mystic and architect, said, for every human illness, somewhere in the world there exists a plant which is the cure. So I like to start with foods and plants. And about 98% of the time, that's going to be enough. And then for those 2% of the time, there's a whole world of things that are, don't exactly grow on a tree or graze in a pasture, or a plant medicine, but are very helpful. And so I don't exclude anything. There's a time and a place for every intervention. So related to this case of the young man with maybe hypogonadism, low testosterone, we have to look at causes. So as root cause resolution is one of the things. So patterns of sleep is huge. Exercise, diet. What does the diet look like? And chemical exposure. Unfortunately, the men have been losing 1% of sperm count per year since 1942, and lost half of our testosterone production in that time for specific reasons. Some of it's malnutrition, some of it's xenohormones and endocrine disruptors due to environmental toxicity. Some of it is EMF. Carrying a cell phone in your pocket, for example, and some of it's just poor nutrition. As you know, we've suffered under this low-fat, cholesterol-free nonsense for decades. We're finally coming out of it, this low-fat diet disaster also was a contributor to this as well as micronutrient deficiencies like zinc and magnesium. As well as macronutrient deficiencies like saturated fats and cholesterol, which are the precursor to these hormones. So I try to just do a good history, look at the lifestyle, and then to your point, there are several natural remedies. Probably the most spectacular of which is a Malaysian or South Pacific herb, tongkat ali, which easily has the greatest evidence base behind it. And so, that's a very good one. There's a Eastern European herb, Tribulus terrestris, not as spectacular, but still very good. And then there we have all the nutritional side. I like to do micronutrient mineral assessments using hair analysis. And most of these guys are low in zinc. Most of these guys are low in magnesium. Most of these guys have some toxicity of aluminum, mercury, cadmium, arsenic, lead. Some type of toxicity that's messing with their glands. And a lot of these guys are just not getting enough quality sleep. And a lot of these, at least with erectile dysfunction, a lot of it is microcirculation. So using microcirculation enhancement is very important. I recommended to a patient who had erectile dysfunction for 15 years, And I gave him, he bought the Beamer device, the mat, and the other thing to use at home, which is a PEMF-based device. And his ED was gone in 2 weeks. And so clearly it wasn't just the endocrine side, which we were working on, but it was a microcirculation side. Now that's general whole body wellness, but related to ED, a lot of it is circulatory, at least as much as it is hormonal.
Yeah. A lot I want to unpack in that, just that right there. But
sure.
You mentioned Tongkat Ali. I got to tell you, I'm telling all my friends, like, this is the real deal. Like I'm skeptical. I've been on hormone optimization for about 10 years.
Oh yeah. This is your wheelhouse. Yeah.
Well, it is. But here's the thing is, like, when guys get on exogenous testosterone, they think it's just going to make them into, this machine, right? But that's not exactly how it works, as you know. And
I'm sure they walk in and like, Jeff, you're ripped. I want to look like you.
But there's an optimization, and there's a kind of a working to kind of find that right fit. But I got to tell you, when I started taking that a few months back, it was a game changer. I just felt like the way that I wanted to feel on hormone optimization was exactly what happened. And so can you explain exactly how that's working inside of my body? And,
it has multiple actions, and I like plant medicines in part because they're what we call polyvalent, or multiple actions at the same time. And there are some drugs that fit in that category, like ivermectin is a polyvalent or multi-action pharma drug that originally came from a soil microbe, isolated from a soil microbe in a Japanese golf course. But plant medicines are beautiful because they typically are polyvalent, have multiple mechanisms of action, and tend not to overdo things because they're less directional than pharma drugs, which are narrower and more directional, so they can produce a symptomatic improvement at the expense of other things. So Tongkat Ali, I teach a whole seminar on this, and it's a wonderful herb. And just before I forget this thread, Jeff, this just came up. I teach a functional medicine certification program for practitioners, which is a year long, and we have our training calls like just before this interview. And one of the cases was a guy who was on TRT for 6 months and was wondering if he could improve his health enough that he wouldn't need it as much. And so, guys typically have a window of 2, 3, maybe 4 months where they can easily try and stop and their gonadal function is intact. But we've had patients where they've been on TRT for 5, 6, 7, 10 years. Yep. And that's tough because the endogenous or body production of those hormones is going to be possibly permanently impaired. So if they can do something natural that, or a SERM that is reversible, that is sometimes preferable before resorting to kind of daily hormone replacement, which again has its place. I mean, look at Bobby Kennedy.
I fully agree. No, I totally agree with you.
I mean, look at Bobby Kennedy. I mean, he's totally ripped. I mean, he works out every day. But, that's part of his rippedness is he looks Jeff-like at a much more advanced age, partly because, daily TRT. He's not getting off of that. It's been too long. Like there's no real chance of that. I don't think he wants to either. But it's fine. I mean, that's part of the package. But anyway, Tongkat Ali has several mechanisms of action that have been identified. One is it's a PDE5 ACE inhibitor. In other words, the same mechanism of action as Cialis, Viagra, all those Me Too drugs. They're enzyme inhibitors that result in higher levels of vasodilative compounds. And that's part of the mechanism of action with that, is that it can have sort of a quick result, kind of game day effect, where you can take a fairly large amount of up to, typically I recommend 20 grams a day in a full spectrum extract, which is a pretty significant dose since most of the clinical trials have been using doses of 1 to 6 grams a day. So 20 grams a day is a pretty, robust, pardon the pun, manly dose. But that can be safely taken long term. It's a very safe herb that's been used for a long time. And so and these plants, very interesting. They take about 25 years to mature and reach their final height of 50 or 60 feet. And these are there are bitters called quasinoids in the plant, especially urocominone, which improve endogenous testosterone production, especially in the Leydig cells of the testicles, in a dose-dependent way, meaning to a point, it works better the more you take. Now, there's obviously safety issues, as with any medicine. You can't just take like a whole bottle every day. But the quasinoid, the urocominone, which is one of the quasinoids, is often used as a quality marker, and also in standardized extracts is sometimes used as the standardization compound. So it's native to Southeast Asia, and it's most of it's cultivated, some of it's wild, but most of it these days is cultivated. Now, this the name means a big tuft of hairs. That's Uricoma longifolia, means long leaf, longifolia. So large tuft of hair is Uricoma, and longifolia means long leaf. Now, interestingly, Jeff, this herb is used for a lot of other things in Southeast Asia, for everything from energy to blood pressure to cancer to infections to all kinds of things. It's actually listed as an anti-cancer treatment in the official government manual of herb preparations in Indonesia. But most commonly it's used as a male infertility and sexual enhancement treatment. Now, in terms of mechanism, we mentioned one of them, which is a PDE5 ACE inhibitor. And it also improves testosterone production. So it inhibits PDE5, and it also enhances endogenous testicular Leydig cell testosterone production, and it's cumulative. So the longer you take it, the better it works, for sure. It also has significant, and I mean really significant, anti-cancer or cancer resistance activity, for sure, very much so. And it's one of only 2 herbs in the world that I'm aware of that can actually regenerate beta cells that produce insulin in the pancreas, the other being Gymnema sylvestre leaf. Wow. This is the root. We use Uricoma longifolia root, sometimes called long jack. But the botanical name is the most reliable, Uricoma longifolia. It lowers blood sugar, improves insulin production, lowers triglycerides, reduces fatty liver. It just does a lot of different things. So those are the main sort of mechanisms, as enhancing endogenous testosterone, and both total and free. And the free is what counts.
Exactly.
It tends to lower SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin, which inactivates testosterone, so you have less free. It tends to lower that when it's high. And that's the cool thing about plants. It tends not to overdo things, which is a good thing. Also, another proposed mechanism of action is optimizing the HPG axis, which is the hypothalamus, which controls the pituitary, which controls the gonads. It tends to optimize that axis. So it appears to have brain activity in the hypothalamus and pituitary as well, which is pretty significant. And so it's probably a secondary effect. It's not the primary effect, but it definitely is part of how it raises testosterone, is by improving this hypothalamic pituitary adrenal and gonadal axis, because the adrenals are the secondary source of testosterone in men, especially as they age, just as the adrenal cortex is the primary source of estrogen and progesterone in postmenopausal women. So that's pretty remarkable. And the benefits are greatest in folks who have the lowest testosterone, which is very herbal. The biggest benefit in the folks who need it the most. So sure, that healthy young guy who just wants some enhancement of their testosterone production and so forth, it'll help. but it's going to be most dramatic when there is a true hypogonadism, low T, low free T, high SHBG kind of situation.
Yeah, beautiful. Well, and you touched on one of the benefits. I mean, it sounds like the kind of the holy grail, and I'll just tell you, like it
Herbally,
feels like
yes.
But you mentioned one of the benefits is the whole ED world, right? And so many guys today just have to rely upon things like Cialis and Viagra.
Right.
What are some additional? You mentioned a device, and I haven't heard of that device that increases circulation. But what are some of the other tools? In your toolbox?
And that's the one medically researched device that improves microcirculation dramatically.
Got it.
And improves oxygenation for athletic performance and recovery. So folks can go to my website, michaelgaeta.com/PEMF, and I've got all the science and the research and all that there for folks who want to learn more. And by the way, I don't forget you, Tongkat Ali also improves all of the sperm parameters. So
Really?
volume, count, motility, and morphology all improve.
Wow.
With this herb, which is pretty amazing. And it also is an immune and overall vitality enhancement as well, and improves libido. Again, it's not, I'll use 20 grams a day for guys ongoingly every day, which is 2 tablets of this Australian product. But then I'll go up to 100 grams a day on game day. Right.
Yeah.
So where they know, okay, I've got a date tonight, or I'm going to get together with my wife or girlfriend, and they want to just be ready, and they want that extra, Cialis action, which it does, just herbally, and they'll load up that morning or early in the day, that sort of thing. But you're not going to do that every day. That wouldn't be a good daily dose. I tend not to go too much above 20 grams of starting extract. Not the finished product, but the starting herb, starting root, 20 grams of starting root per day, which then it gets extracted and concentrated into a tablet. So that's just what I do. Now, your question was about ED?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we've got to look at the labs, look at luteinizing hormone, LH, which stimulates testosterone production in the Leydig cells of the testicles. That's the pituitary hormone that stimulates testosterone production. And we'll know if a guy has what we call hypo, which means low, gonadism, so poor testicular hormonal production, looking at LH and FSH. If LH and FSH are above 6, we know then to that degree there is actual hypogonadism, because the pituitary is sort of yelling at the testicles to produce testosterone instead of a gentle whisper, which would be ideal, a low, stimulating hormone production. So for ED, we've got to look at total and free testosterone. We've got to look at FSH and LH. We've got to look at SHBG in the labs. And the hair, we have to do a hair analysis to look at the zinc to copper ratio, look at absolute zinc levels, and look for heavy metals. So folks can go to michaelgaeta.com/store, STORE, and get a hair analysis. That's really important, because most of these guys have low zinc, possibly low magnesium. We want to get all the data on all of that. Now, that's the hormonal side of ED. The other side is circulatory. So the Beamer PEMF is the best in the world by far at improving microcirculation. And then we have microcirculatory herbs and nutrients that can be very useful for improving small vessel circulation, which makes up 74% of the entire circulatory system. We have 60 to 100,000 miles of blood vessels in our bodies. So literally your blood vessels stretched out in a line would encircle the earth at the equator 3 times, maybe 4. That's insane. So 74% of that are microvessels, not big arteries and veins. So these are the arterioles, capillaries, and venules that make up the business side, the business end of the cardiovascular system, where the actual delivery of oxygen, nutrients, and hormones happens, and the actual drainage of CO2 and waste happens to get the bad stuff out. So good stuff in, bad stuff out. Now, with the erectile dysfunction, we have to look at all the hormonal stuff I mentioned, but then we have to look at microcirculation. So how do you enhance that? Certainly basic things like exercise, regular exercise, 3 or 4 hours a week, clearly enhances circulation. Other things are foods like buckwheat, ginger, garlic, turmeric. These are all ginkgo. These are all foods and medicinal herbs. And danshen, one of my favorite Chinese herbs, which is Salvia miltiorhiza, one of the most important herbs in the world, really? For cardiovascular support, cancer resistance, microcirculation support, liver and kidney health, anxiety, sleep, just general wellness. I mean, it's an amazing herb. Folks also find that at michaelgaeta.com/store.
What was the name of that herb?
The Chinese name is danshen, Danshen. Yeah. The common names are Chinese sage, Chinese salvia, red sage, red salvia. And the botanical name, which is the most important, because you never make a mistake that way, is Salvia miltiorhiza. And I have a whole short course on this in our store page, where I've got an educational video and links to 4 or 5 research studies. But this herb is great. It's one of my favorite herbs. And because we have so much cardiovascular disease, so much cancer, so much, anxiety, insomnia, and fatty liver, this sort of does all of that. In addition to, the dietary things like beets, for example, enhancing nitric oxide production for vasodilation, peak effects in about 2.5 hours. This can enhance, so eating beets, on game day, or just making sure you have beets every day, beet root, but also beet leaf. Great way to enhance circulation through this vasodilation from nitric oxide production in the endothelium, which is the lining of our blood vessels. So those are all microcirculatory things. So if you can get the hormonal side sorted out, plenty of saturated fat, plenty of zinc, plenty of beets, plenty of sleep, because testosterone is a parasympathetic hormone. We usually think of it as like hormone of aggression and intensity and attack. It's not that at all. It's a hormone, I would say, of dominance, but not aggression necessarily, because it's a parasympathetic hormone. And that's why I had this personal experience. It took my wife at the time and I 4 years to conceive our son, because we were so stressed out. Mm-hmm. And when you're stressed out, that's sympathetic. And your parasympathetic just ain't happening, which is digestion, sexual function, testosterone production, rest, relax, digest, repair, detoxify. That's all parasympathetic. And then, I'm ovulating today. We have to go at it, and all this pressure. So it's kind of counterproductive. So that getting folks out of sympathetic dominance into a more parasympathetic balance really helps testosterone, because you can't make testosterone, because it's in part a reproductive hormone. And how important is that if you're running from a wild ox, right? Ancestrally, you're in a survival, fight or flight. I'm running away from a wild animal kind of thing. All your digestion shuts down, repair shuts down, detox shuts down. None of that's important, because you're just trying to stay alive. So people are in that stress response a lot these days, and understandably are not getting into testosterone production, which has to do with reproduction of the species in part. Yep. So that man who is kind of calmly assertive and confident, the stuff that drives women crazy, they love that. The man who's sort of calm, collected, cool, confident, assertive, but not aggressive, dominating, but not controlling, not hyper, aggressive. That's all about testosterone. So that's, kind of more on the hormonal side. So if you get those two things right, Jeff, the endocrine side and the microcirculation side, it's very, very effective without usually having to resort to more pharmaceutical type interventions like TRT or SERMs. And I'll usually, for guys who do want to go pharmaceutical, I usually recommend a SERM first, because it's reversible. You're not going to cause hypogonadism if you decide to stop. It's not going to shut down your own testicular function if you decide to stop. But again, there's a place for everything. There's a place for SERMs, there's a place for TRT, but all of that is fine. But again, ideally as a last resort, after you've done all the natural stuff first.
For our audience members that don't know what a SERM is, can you explain what a SERM is and what are the common
Yeah, yeah. These are it's 2 generations refined from Clomid. And this is a selective estrogen receptor modulator. And that's what SERM stands for. And there's other types of drugs. I don't want to get too deep into that, but the basic idea is you're enhancing testosterone production in a reversible way, meaning it has a cumulative effect as long as you take it. But if you stop, you will still have intact gonadal function. And so it's a step before the potentially non-reversible hypogonadism from long-term, I don't mean a month or two, but 1-2 years or more, TRT, where it's kind of like that door closes and you're sort of on a lifetime replacement regimen, which again, it's not bad. It's just a choice. And for some guys, that's the best thing for them, and that's great. I support them in that. But a SERM is a intermediate step before going all the way to a TRT.
Yep, and those are things like Clomid and enclomiphene, which you just.
Enclomiphene is the 2 steps, a second generation past Clomid kind of approach.
Exactly. Yeah. Perfect. You touched on something that it's close to home because I actually did it last week, a hair test.
Oh, good for you.
I was skeptical. I'm not going to lie. I was very skeptical, but it was recommended, and I went, and the result was interesting. It was that everything was right on except my adrenals. Oh, they identified
sodium to magnesium ratio. Yeah.
So talk to us a little about hair tests, because it's something that, we thought about, okay, is this something we want to bring into the fold with our, our friends and our clients and everything else?
Yeah, I would recommend it. I tell you why I use it. And I don't go crazy on testing, I do 8 basic types of tests, but it's going to be hundreds, not thousands of dollars in testing. I started practicing in a very middle class neighborhood, and, there were so-called integrative physicians that you needed to do $5,000-$10,000 of testing before they even saw you for an evaluation. So I'm not into that. But this is a low-cost method using tissue mineral analysis, and it's a biopsy. Your hair is a biopsy. You're getting a cellular reading, a tissue reading, non-invasively, using a hair sample. This goes back a little over 100 years to France, and has literally hundreds of studies validating its use. The problem, and why you should be skeptical, is that there's a lot of different methods. There's no standardization of lab methodology. That's the problem. And so in almost every lab repeatedly wash the hair first with solvents before they test it, which really messes with the results. And based on the hair, it'll have a different outcome. It's kind of a mess. So you want a lab that doesn't wash the hair. Best lab in the world is Analytical Research Labs in Phoenix, Arizona. They've done over 5 million samples since 1974. And folks can learn more about that in our store, michaelgaeta.com/store. Perfect. More detail there.
We'll link that too for everyone. That's awesome.
Yeah. But the basic idea is you're looking at a few things. One is the good guys, the nutritional minerals. How's your zinc? How's your calcium? How's your magnesium? How's your chromium? That sort of thing. Then you're looking at the bad guys, which are toxic elements like mercury, cadmium, lead, arsenic, aluminum. Then you're looking at mineral ratios, because ratios are more important than levels. And that tells us mostly about the endocrine system. So thyroid, adrenal, blood sugar, sex hormones. And they don't tell you absolute function. It's telling you trends or propensities or tendencies, right? So if a person has a high calcium to potassium ratio, they may still have normal thyroid function, but they have a trend towards low thyroid function. You still have to look at the blood, the axillary temperature to get an exact read on function, but it will tell you tendencies or propensities in a given direction in the endocrine system. So there's 5 endocrine tests, 5 endocrine ratios, and 1 protein ratio. Are you eating enough and digesting your protein well? And then you're looking at oxidation rate, which is very important because a slow oxidizer will tend to have impaired immune function, impaired cancer resistance, and just low energy in general, because that's set by thyroid and adrenal. So it gives you a lot of information very inexpensively. If it's a good lab, you're getting reliable information. And it's a great way to track progress over time. And I just say, as a clinician, I find things I would have missed otherwise. I just wouldn't have known. I do a lot of blood work and other types of testing, omega-3 index, other home tests. But the hair analysis complements the blood work. The blood tells you the blood, the hair tells you about the tissue status. And you want to look at both, because stuff gets messed up in the blood last. It gets messed up in the tissues first.
Yep.
So you can have great blood work and still be a mess because the body will sacrifice the organs and tissues to keep blood chemistry in a very narrow range. So if something is messed up in the blood, it's advanced. I want to find stuff sooner than that. And that's what the hair analysis is, the perfect complement. I love both. And the best approach is to use both.
Yeah. You mentioned two things, the thyroid function as well as the adrenals, which I just asked you about. And that's where I see a lot of guys today. And when we actually do the blood work, we realize that the thyroid isn't functioning right. But so many folks come to us and they think it's low testosterone because they're tired and they're sluggish. But what we find oftentimes is it is related to the adrenals and to the thyroid not functioning properly. Are there natural remedies that you recommend? You mentioned the balances of minerals and what have you. Talk to us a little bit about that.
I like to do just sort of whole body mineral support with trace minerals B12, which is a food-based and food chelated mineral supplement from Standard Process. As an everybody thing, cod liver oil, that's an everybody thing. A multi-nutrient that's food-based, not synthetic like I used to use, like Catalin, came out in 1929. Used a 96-year-old multivitamin made of food. So I start with some basics, and then based on the hair analysis, we'll know where the deficiencies are, and then we'll look at what individual things they might need. So the most important thyroid vitamins is the C complex, which is not ascorbic acid, but it's the whole food C complex, which is dozens of nutrients, including tyrosinase, which is organic copper. So you need the whole C complex. You need vitamin F, which is the unsaturated fatty acid complex, which includes iodine. So that is, kind of the two thyroid vitamins. One is actually a lipid complex. And then you need enough protein. And this is why most of the vegetarians and vegans are low thyroid, low adrenal. They just don't have enough tyrosine to make catecholamines like epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine, and they don't have enough tyrosine to make thyroid hormone. The T in thyroid hormone, T3, T4, the T is not thyroid, but tyrosine. And the 3 or 4 is iodine. So they may have an iodine deficiency. They may have a tyrosine deficiency. They may have a lack of the C complex, the F complex. So those are things that are good basics. And then on the herbs, so cataplex C, cataplex F, adequate protein, typically 0.5 gram per pound. So minimum, say 150-pound person, minimum 75 grams of protein. Most people don't eat enough protein, to give their body the fuel they need for repair, but also for these amino acid-based hormones like catecholamines and thyroid hormone. Yep. Then there are herbs like bladderwrack, which has been used for centuries in Japan, is a sea vegetable, which restores thyroid function, acts as a multimineral, aids in weight loss. Another herb, which is an Ayurvedic herb, Bacopa monnieri, is an adaptogen that's great for helping retain new information when you're learning new things. It's a student herb, but also helps thyroid function. An even more powerful herb for the thyroid is ashwagandha, my favorite Ayurvedic herb, which is literally translates as horse strength or horse smell. Ashwagandha, which is Withania somnifera. So somnifera, the Roman god Somnus for sleep, is one of the 2 herbs that I know of, and I've been doing herbs for 35 years, that gives you more energy, but also helps you sleep. The other one is Schisandra, my favorite Chinese herb, Wu Wei Tzu. So ashwagandha is a great thyroid herb, in addition to bladderwrack, is a great, and bacopa is a great add-on. Those all 3 come in a formula called Thyroid Complex, also in our store. So those are some great herbs for the thyroid. And then you have the nutrition, and then you talked about the adrenals. Yeah, so the C complex is most important for the adrenals. Again, which is vitamin C is not ascorbic acid. Ascorbic acid is just the antioxidant protector of the C complex, but it's a lot more than that. So the adrenals need vitamin C complex from foods, so things like citrus and buckwheat and pea vine juice and mushroom, all great sources, food sources of the C complex. And then the adrenals for the cortex hormones, all of them. So the adrenal cortex and sex hormones are all made out of cholesterol. And the first metabolite of that is pregnenolone, which then becomes everything else in the adrenal cortex. So you've got to have plenty of cholesterol and saturated fat in the diet. Now we're talking adrenal. And you need plenty of sleep because the adrenals do not do well with the sleep deficit. They just get, tuckered out. Chronic stress, being in sympathetic dominance, chronic stress response, sympatheticonia, not helpful for the adrenals. Yeah. They found with special forces troops, they put them under insane amounts of stress and training, and they would image their adrenals and they would hypertrophy. They'd actually get bigger to meet the demands of that insane stress they put them through as part of the training. But then they would atrophy and shrivel up if it was prolonged or they were malnourished. So if they didn't have the nutrition to support that adrenal function under that high demand, it would just shrivel up and then they would collapse, like they just couldn't do it anymore. So those are all factors, So zinc is huge for, especially for the pineal and the gonads. Adrenals need sodium. And I tell you, it's so 8 or 9 times out of 10, we do a hair analysis and they're low in sodium.
Yep.
And your adrenals just don't work without that. In fact, they did an animal study years ago where they had a bunch of test mice and they cut all their adrenal glands out. One group, they gave unlimited salt. So they gave them like a salt lick and they could eat as much as they felt they needed. And the others, they had salt restriction. The salt restriction mice were dead in 2 weeks.
Wow.
The salt group, they had unlimited salt, lived a full lifespan, even without adrenal glands, which is insane.
Wow.
So if a person craves salt, I'm very clear they can have unlimited salt. Unlimited, never limit salt. As long as it's not Morton's iodized salt garbage, but I make a real healthy natural sea salt like a Celtic or Himalayan or Redmond real salt or something like that. A full spectrum, unrefined salt, unlimited. Do not restrict salt ever in a person who craves salt because their adrenals are toast and they need more adrenal support through the sodium. So a crashed adrenal patient is typically going to have low sodium, low potassium. And we'll see that pattern. They'll have a downslope on the hair analysis and the macrominerals. So normal to high calcium, magnesium, and low sodium, potassium. Classic adrenal exhaustion case. And there are other minerals as well, but the main thing is sodium and secondarily potassium. So we got to address those deficiencies, make sure they get enough good restorative sleep. That same Beamer mat is amazing for enhancing depth and quality of sleep. Provides the earth vibration around 10 hertz. It's almost like an earthing mat and just really helps enhance quality. And I sleep so well, and I need less sleep. I'm fully restored on less sleep using this at night. So anyway, those are all things that really help.
I could sit here and listen to this all day, getting 35 years of wisdom on different topics.
I know it's a fire hose. I know we have limited time.
It's awesome. I love it.
I'm remiss, Jeff. I'm sorry. The most important herb in the world by far for the adrenal glands, especially the cortex, but also in the medulla to some point, is licorice. Unbelievable. I'm reversing Addison's disease, which is autoimmune hypoadrenia. Licorice is the most important adrenal restorative herb in the world, easily.
Really?
There are other great herbs, ashwagandha, romania, schizandra, eleuthero, other great adrenal herbs, but this is supreme, licorice root. Anyway, I didn't want to forget that. I love that. In your adrenal question.
I love it. Well, and one of the areas that you speak a lot about, and it appears you're one of the world's expert on this, is the prevention of cancer through natural remedies. Yes. I'd love to just kind of get a snapshot of course, what are the natural ways to do this. In fact, my partner and I are actually flying over to Turkey tonight to do the full body screening and what have you, just as preventative, right? And it's just we're interested, and we want to catch things if they're early, and what have you. And so we're very interested in preventative care
good.
and what have you. And so I'm just curious from that standpoint.
Yeah. So cancer is usually a mitochondrial disease. It's a metabolic condition. We used to think that, once the Nobel Prize, Watson and Crick, 1964, double helix DNA, Nobel Prize, well-deserved. And then this whole metabolic model that Otto Warburg talked about in the early decades of the 1900s, he was dropped like a hot potato in favor of this molecular genetics, molecular biology. It's all about the genes approach. But that's a fool's errand, and that's not where most of the problem is. So cancer is a metabolic disease, mitochondrial damage, mitochondrial insufficiency, then leading to the genetic damage of cancer. So we've got to look at, and that's why things like insulin potentiation therapy really help, keeping blood sugar and insulin is very pro-cancer, keeping that relatively low. So we've got to look at the diet, sugar and chemicals. Insulin is very pro-cancer. Estrogen and xenoestrogens are very pro-cancer, very proliferative. So we've got to look at those kind of endocrine influences, and we've got to look at mitochondrial function. So I go back to what Warburg said, the requirements for cancer resistance to keep cancer away. One is very strong blood. So I'll give you specifics. Red cells, target 5, hemoglobin, target 15, hematocrit, target 42. So in a simple CBC, which is like a $10 blood test. Very simple, basic, but essential. You've got to have your blood loaded with oxygen. Number 2, he said you have to have so fast of a blood flow and so much oxygen in your blood that there's oxygen left over in your veins, which is a very clever way of putting it, that your tissues are so full of oxygen, which runs your mitochondria, by the way. Your mitochondria use oxygen to make energy. I'm not going to get into biochemistry in that, but you need oxygen to run your mitochondria. If there's so much oxygen, the cells are full, the cup runneth over, so that there's actually oxygen left over in your venules and veins, that guarantees that you gave your cells enough oxygen. So his thing was every cell in the body has to be just smothered in oxygen all the time. Strong blood flow. That's where the Beamer comes in, because it improves tissue oxygenation up to 30%, which is insane. Like, you're an athlete. If an elite athlete, a competitive athlete, gets a 2%, 3% improvement in oxygenation, they won the race. Like, that's a big deal. 30% is insane. So performance off the charts. I have stories about that if you want. But you've got to have strong blood, amazing blood flow, like super fast micro circulation. And the third thing he said is you have to avoid carcinogens. Now, he said that in the 40s and 50s. Today, it's insane. He would flip out if he saw how much environmental toxicity we're subject to today. It's a surprise everybody doesn't have cancer, given how much environmental toxicity we're exposed to in our food, our air, our water. It's insane. Now, those are the basics. So clean, local, organic diet. Stay away from packaged foods as much as possible. Read the label. If it has more than 5 or 6 ingredients, don't eat it. Do an annual purification or detoxification program. That's also in our store. And really be careful about those things. And check your insulin. Fasting insulin, if you haven't eaten in 12 hours, your fasting insulin should not be above 5. Stupidly, the lab reference range goes up to 26, which is insane. Yeah. So you've got to have ideal glucose, which is the least important, mid-80s, insulin 5 or less, and hemoglobin A1C. Insulin's really important too. But hemoglobin A1C, glycosylated or glycated hemoglobin, which is a 2 to 4 month average of your blood sugar, should be at 5.2 or less. Reference range goes up to 5.6. 5.7 begins prediabetes. 6.5 begins diabetes. So really aim for 5.2. If you look at Perlmutter's work, the neurologist, he's one of the guys who's leading the charge, so to speak, to consider Alzheimer's disease type 3 diabetes. We see an increase in Alzheimer's risk at 5.3 and above. So you really want to aim for 5.2 on the hemoglobin A1C, 5 or less on fasting insulin. That right there, with your robust blood and great circulation, will do an enormous amount to increase your cancer resistance. You can also look at a blood test, nonspecific, of HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. That's the pregnancy test.
Yep.
Your body produces HCG in 2 instances. One is you're having a baby, and 2, you have cancer. It's not a guarantee. It's not a diagnostic test. It's just a risk factor screening test. But looking at HCG is a factor. The other big factor is, and this is one of my bugaboos, Jeff, if you've read my stuff, is cholesterol. Cholesterol is highly protective against cancer. Big study in Denmark looked at tens of thousands of patients. They found for cancer resistance, optimal total blood cholesterol, a minimum of 230, which will give your local clueless brainwashed cardiologist a seizure because they've been brainwashed into the cholesterol hypothesis, which has been completely disproven as nonsense. Blood cholesterol has nothing to do with cardiovascular risk. Half the people who have heart attacks and strokes have normal cholesterol, and there's no relationship. And then LDL, so-called bad cholesterol, that stupid, absurd nonsense, it's protective, just in a different way than an HDL. They found optimal cholesterol for cancer resistance, LDL cholesterol, and there's only one cholesterol. When they say HDL, LDL, the only thing that's different is the protein box that it sits in, because it's a lipid. Lipids don't float well in the blood. It needs a protein box to float in the blood with. That's the only difference. There's only one type of cholesterol. It's just what changes is the protein box it sits in, like a UPS box that you ship at the shipping store. So optimal LDL, at least 130. Wow. And your cancer risk goes up. The lower your cholesterol is, below 230, the lower your LDL is, below 130. They found it across all cancers measured. So people with low cholesterol, which is below 200, should never, ever, ever be below 180. And I get actively worried if it's below 160, have a definitely increased risk of cancer, for sure. It's irrefutable. It's all over the literature. It's nobody's opinion. Low cholesterol means more cancer. Now, am I saying the statin drugs cause cancer? I'm not saying that. I'm saying that low cholesterol contributes to cancer, and those drugs lower cancer risk. I was teaching my cardiovascular seminar in Austin, Texas one day. A guy raised his hand. He's an endocrinologist. He said, you should know our practice guidelines for diabetics say that we have to get their cholesterol down to below 100. Which is based on nothing. They're just making stuff up to sell more drugs that don't work. Yep. And potentially it is increasing their risk of cancer, maybe, because we know cholesterol is protective. That's why cholesterol rises with advancing age. You need more protection. Yep. And back in the day, before these stupid statins came out, Mevacor from Merck in 1987, normal cholesterol at age 59 and up was 330. In the medical textbooks. I have a copy. Medical textbooks had stratified cholesterol levels with higher upper limits as we age. At 59 plus, it was 330. So these drugs came out in 1987. Who needed them? Nobody. Because average unmedicated cholesterol in the US is 220. No big deal. So they had to create an upper limit below the national average because you can't get there without drugs. And that's when they lowered it to 200. Now it's 169, 100 for diabetics. And the doctors, they're not bad people. They've just been brainwashed with this stupid nonsense that cholesterol is bad. And I just ask patients to write down. I do whatever. I've done this thousands of times with patients. Please write this down. 3 words, cholesterol is good. And then I ask them to write down 3 more words, ignore blood cholesterol. So that's another risk factor for cancer risk.
Interesting. And I know we just have a couple minutes left. I don't want to be respectful of your time. I know you're very busy, but you mentioned one thing that we use as a tool commonly in the hormone optimization space, which is HCG.
Sure.
Yeah. And the relation to cancer is that, should we be concerned about HCG supplementation? I
don't think so. It's a side effect. It's the hormonal. Okay. So cancer hijacks your entire body. hijacks your immune system, hijacks your vascular system, hijacks your endocrine system. And it causes you to make more HCG, not every time, but potentially in some cases at least. It causes your endocrine system to make more HCG to promote its growth. Now, if you had a patient with, a sketchy PET scan, right, which is a glucose uptake test, I would not go near HCG because they may have cancer, right? If a patient has a diagnosis of cancer, if they have positive PET findings or PET CT, this would be the worst thing for them to be on.
Got it.
With known or possible cancer. And in my opinion, if they have a history of cancer, I probably would find another route to help them out. And I know you have a big toolbox, Jeff, so you don't need that.
Well said. Well, good. Well, I can tell you that we're going to get a lot of folks asking where they can get some of the herbs and the Emer device and everything else. Where can our audience go to find some of the things you talked about today? Yeah.
Well, I have a clinic and a school. So my clinic, and I'm happy to extend to your listeners, Jeff, a consultation to see if they want to come in as a patient. Most of my practice is virtual. I have patients all over the world, although I live in Boulder, Colorado. So some folks will come in or fly in or whatever, but I can work with anybody who has a phone or a computer or Zoom or something like that. So I'm happy to do a consult, just to see, is this right for you? And then we have a school with 60 courses in natural health. So if people want to get educated and learn more, they can do that to take care of themselves and their families. We have a ton of practitioner trainings for practitioners who want to get really good at what I call natural functional medicine, which is using foods and plants more than synthetic nutraceuticals as a first resort. And then we have a store where there's lots of great lab tests and supplements and herbs and all kinds of things to help yourself. Again, our philosophy is nature first, drugs last. And then, in our store and in our PEMF page, you can learn more about that and how to get one. It's designed as a home care medical device. 8 minutes twice a day is all you need. So it's easy to use, works better than any other device in the market. It's been compared as head and shoulders above everything else with 59 published studies rather than the usual PEMF has 0 using that exact device. So we've got a lot of great resources for people. And, for your listeners, happy to extend a free consult to see if they want to become a patient or what courses might be good for them. And for practitioners who want to really get good at this stuff that we started to talk about today.
I love it. We will include all of those links, so click below. And I just really appreciate you making time. Dr. Michael Gaeta, thank you.
Jeff,
anything you want to leave us with our audience with?
Well, just hope that if you have a condition, if you have a health goal, it doesn't just have to be pharma drugs, right? Yes. There's diet, lifestyle, natural remedies that work just about every time. So to have hope, and because a lot of people get a diagnosis, this is how it's going to be forever, and you have to take these drugs forever for diabetes or hypertension or whatever. But and then those things aren't bad. But to have hope that there's a natural solution for just about literally anything. And if you're doing conventional treatments, you can use this alongside to help get to that. I do recommend patients go for drug-free so they're not tied to pharma drugs forever, which just means there's something that hasn't been addressed. And my last point is just appreciation for you. What I've seen about what your work is, you're just doing great work in health optimization. And that's just so important. This is the future, Jeff. What you're doing is the future. Is like, let's not wait till things get so bad that you do need pharma drugs and surgery and chemo and radiation and blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. What you're doing is really leading edge. All that optimization, biohacking stuff that you're doing and gotten really good at is, I know, helping countless people not get on that pharma merry-go-round where they're just on all drugs all the time. The average American adult on 4 to 6 pharma drugs and more with advancing age. You're doing great work, and I appreciate it.
I appreciate that very much. It means a lot. Well, you know where to find him now. We'll put the links below. But again, thank you for joining us. And until the next Unscripted, we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Jeff.